Hello, and welcome to Slice of Wine, the podcast that gives you the snippets and the backgrounds on wines behind the barrel and people and companies. And here today I have Serge Losac. He's with Kopke Wines, and we're doing our first wine tasting podcast. Welcome, Serge.
Thank you. And today we're going to be tasting ports, which is for your first tasting.
For my first tasting, so something new. We are tasting ports from the oldest port wine house in the world. So this is cool.
Kopke. And Kopke is the oldest port wine house, founded in 1638. Just a little background on ports and what we'll be tasting today. Kopke was founded in 1638. At that time, there wasn't yet port as we know it. It was basically just wine. During the course of the 1700s, the British shipping to England started fortifying the wines just for the shipping purposes. In other words, to keep them, it was fresh wine, and to keep them steady and,
By steady, you mean like not exploding on the ship?
Yeah, or not going bad during a long
bad.
transit.
Yeah.
They would fortify them. After a time, this became a style, and it wasn't until the 1820s that fortification actually became a law in Portugal. In other words, a system that was surveyed by law and approved, and you had to do it a certain way. So between our founding in 1638 and the time that really port came to be in its modern sense in the 1820s was 150 years. So things move slowly in the wine industry, as you might know. When that happened, there were two distinct different threads that were followed. There was the British style of port making, which is what we know today as the Ruby style. So they would fortify those fresh wines. And that's what they always did. They focused on fresh wines. They did not keep stocks. Some of the Portuguese houses decided to go another path, and they started keeping stocks and aging in barrel. So, for instance, a vintage wine, a vintage port, is a Ruby-style port. That ages in the bottle. It's bottled after 1 year, ages in the bottle. You can keep it for a long time. Might age for 75 years. A tawny style, or an aged white, which we're going to try as well, is something that's aged in the barrel and released whenever enough years have gone by, and maybe released several times. So there are two different styles of port, and today we're going to be talking about the Portuguese style. We're going to be talking about aged tawnies and aged whites.
Very cool. So so Ruby, obviously is red and has very, very little like oak at all.
Yep.
It's basically like red wine that goes into the bottle, ages in the bottle.
For the higher end vintage and things like that, they put a small amount of oak on it for a year, and then that's it, in the bottle.
Yeah.
And again, tawnies, on the other hand, stay in barrels. They might stay in barrels and they get bottled or they get blended. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
And all of these wines, except maybe the whites, the tawnies start out red and they turn tawny because of the age.
It's the color.
So something that we don't know much about in the United States, I think, are the white ports. So that's what we're going to first start here with.
As you see, this is a white port. Now, we have two different white ports in front of us. And this is what we're going to talk about a little bit today. One is a colheita. Now, the word colheita means vintage in Portuguese. And we can...
These are the cutest little vials. This is a tasting
This
set.
is a 2003 colheita. The reason the word vintage is not used is because that has been usurped by the British. A vintage port is a ruby. So they do not use the term vintage when they're making these aged ports. There's two types of aged ports. There are the single-year ones that are called colheitas, and there's what a lot of consumers know, the 10, 20, 30, 40, which are blends.
So it's blends of many years.
So we're tasting a 2003 against a 20-year-old white.
So they're basically both around 20 years old. One is, the 2003 is, 19 going on 20. Almost.
Exactly. And that's the exercise that we're going to look at today. So let's taste the 03.
Okay.
So there's also a difference in sourcing. The 03, the colheitas in general are sourced entirely from our own vineyards, from the top of the hill. Why the top of the hill? The Douro is mostly hills around a river. Why the top of the hill? Because you get more acidity and you get more freshness because it's a little bit cooler up there. It's a microclimate at the top of the hill, and you tend to get a little bit less sweetness. So we're going to taste that first.
Oh my gosh, the nose is like...
And once people taste aged whites, it's a bit of a revelation. Now we taste that side by side with a 20-year-old white. And what's a 20-year-old white? As the 03 is 1 year, a 20-year-old or 10 or a 30-year-old is a blended wine. So this is blended by all the years. So this will have wine in it that's up to 4 years older than the statement of age and up to 2 years younger than the statement of age.
Okay, so there's
and
a
the
range.
winemaker's job is to make this the same every year, while the year designated wines are going to be different because
Is
of
a
the vintage.
reflection of that year.
Exactly.
So I am still, by the way, like
It's confusing.
digging. No, I'm just digging the like lingering flavors of the 2003. I mean, it's like, so it's like bright and fresh with a slight sweetness, and then has this like nuttiness that's just going on and on and on. It's amazing.
They last forever.
It's
and
lasting
that's still
forever.
a fairly, in port terms, this is a young wine. The funny things about, we mentioned tawny, and we'll do some tawnies in a minute. The whites, as they're aged in barrel, tend to get darker, and the tawnies, as they're aged in barrel, tend to get lighter. So at one point, when they get to be like 70 years old, the whites get darker than the reds.
Ha, that's nice. So, okay, so that's a point that I wanted to clarify. So white port is made out of
White grapes.
And as you can see, if you're like watching this and not just listening, the color of this is really more of like a golden amber.
Yes, exactly. And it'll continue to get darker.
And it will get darker and darker.
And the question always arises, what are the grapes? There's about 30 of them that are allowed just for white.
not gonna list
And probably
them.
another 50 just for reds. The main ones for the whites are Gouveio, Arinto, and Malvasia Fina. And we can talk about the reds in a few minutes. Now, you see the difference with the 20-year-old is going to be sweeter, thicker. That's the house style. The master blender, his job is to make it this way every year. And then you'll note the 03 is actually more lively,
Very
less
lively.
sweet. And that's the advantage of the colhetas in general.
Yeah, and the 20-year-old style is, it's less nutty. It's more, it's very, there's some brightness. There's some very good acidity, but I'd say more fruit than the intense nuttiness that you get
More
in the
honey.
2003. More honey. Tons of honey. Oh, it's amazing. So white ports are something that folks in America don't really know so
Yeah,
much. I
and
mean, it's a new thing.
And it's
for us.
it's a thing about our country because just in general, there are several types of white port. Many are just everyday white ports, supermarket wines. And in France, for instance, Portugal ships more white port to France than the tawnies or rubies.
Oh, interesting.
Because that's everybody in France has a bottle of white port in their fridge for aperitif. I mean, it's a very common practice, and they don't really buy as much of the tawnies. So it's country by country.
Yeah.
There are 3 different kinds of regular now. Apart from the aged whites, there are 3 different kinds of regular white port. And I'll do it very quickly and tell you the difference. There is what's called a dry white,
Okay.
a fine white, and a lagrima. And the only difference between these wines is when the fortification begins. So fortification, really quickly, is when the neutral grape spirit is added. That stops the fermentation.
Right.
That pushes up the alcohol and also retains the sweetness because
Right.
the fermentation eats all the sugar.
Right.
So
So
a
it
dry
kills
white,
the yeasts before they eat
exactly.
all the sugar. So there,
Exactly.
some of that natural sweetness remains, and by adding spirits, you're bumping up the alcohol.
Exactly. So the 3 types I mentioned, the only difference is when they're fortified.
Okay.
Lagrima is the sweetest. It's fortified
Super early.
exactly. Fine white, normal, about in the middle. And a dry white is fortified a little bit later, so it's slightly drier. It's still a sweet wine, but it's slightly drier. And those are all different from these.
Okay. And these are none of those.
Yeah.
So let's try. I would love to. Let's try,
try the tawnies?
The tawnies.
Okay.
Yeah. So now we've tried the
take
whites.
another
I'm
sip
actually
of
going
three
to
'cause it's
put
my
my wines
favorite.
over here and get new glasses because I
You should save
want
them,
to
yes.
dump them. Yes.
Okay, so now we're going to have some tawnies.
Okay.
And we have a 2012 tawny. Mm-hmm. That's our Colheita. Just like we had an 03 Colheita.
Okay. So
on the,
this
on
is
the white. And we're going to try that side by side with a 10-year tawny. So now, Colheitas, by law, you can bottle after 7 years. Kupke waits 10. So
Okay.
we wait 10 years. So the 2012 Colheita we're trying today is our newest release.
You just bottled that. Okay.
So now, a thing to keep in mind, we don't just bottle all of the 2012 because otherwise it wouldn't happen anymore.
right, you need it for the 20.
So we
and
bottle a
the-
certain amount in a certain year, wait 2-3 years, bottle a certain amount more. As it goes, it gets older. For instance, if we were drinking a bottle of 1970 Colheita that had been bottled in 1960, and the bottling date's always on the back, the front of the label would look the same if it were bottled in 1970 or in 2020. On the back, it would say when it was bottled. So if it was bottled in 1970, that's a 10-year-old wine. These wines don't really move in the bottle. At the opposite of a ruby.
Yes, right. It's not going right.
Exactly.
Right. So, but so you would have you might bottle some of the 2000, just so I'm clear,
Yeah.
you might bottle some of the 2012 10 years later.
10 years later,
and then
20
you
years
might bottle
later,
some
30 years later, 40 years later.
So you're basically aging it
Exactly.
more in the barrel.
And it gets more expensive
Yeah, of course.
as you go along.
But you aging it in the barrel versus me getting a bottle and then
And-
trying to age it completely different.
Yes, exactly.
Completely
So basically,
different.
we're doing the work for you here.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
if you
yeah.
buy a bottle of vintage port, yeah, you can drink it, but it's really not going to. It's infanticide. It's not going to
Yeah.
be really good until 30 years go by.
Right.
So if you want
Right.
to hang on to it for 30 years, you can. Or if
Go
you've been
for
doing
it.
that.
Yeah.
But if you want to drink a wine that's already aged and is at a proper level in its development, you buy 20s that are
Yes.
aged in wood.
Yes.
So here's the 2012. So this is a baby Colheita. This is a young wine. And you can tell the color still has a little bit of red in it, but it's turning tawny. And the word tawny is the color. Ruby is reflective of those bright red colors in the young ruby wines.
Yep.
And the tawny aged in wood, it turns brownish. So that's where the word tawny comes from.
You still get a lot of like the nice,
Oh,
like
yeah.
the fruit, like the fruit side of things on the nose,
And it's got some nice tannins. It's still a little bit grippy. I mean, this is a long way from its. Try it again in 10 years. It's going to be totally different. And it's from the same barrel, so they just bottle at different times. And then we've got the 10 year. So as I mentioned earlier, the formula, the master blender has to make this the same every year. That's the one thing to remember. He's got to make it the same because it's a house style. The wines going into this are up to 4 years older and no more than 2 years younger. So he has a 7-year span to work with as of the date of bottling. And
Okay.
as of the claim of age on the label. So if it's a 10 year, if it's a 20 year, if it's a 30 year,
There's a 7-year span within that.
within that. And of course, to do that, you have to have the stocks. A lot of the
Right.
a lot of the British companies, quote unquote, they've started trying to get into the 20 business as well, but they've been buying stocks from other companies, closeout stocks, closing out other companies.
Oh, right.
A lot of the Portuguese houses like Kupke, we've had these stocks. We've got stuff going back to the 1800s.
Right. So you could
That's
just,
we've always the élevage, as we say in French or in English sometimes, I guess, is ours. The wines
Yes.
are not purchased.
right. So when
It's an
it's your
important
house
point.
style, it's your house style from.
So
You're
you see
not
the difference between the 10 year shows a little bit of age because it's some older wines in there.
Yes. Yep.
And the 2012 is actually quite fresh.
It is quite fresh, and it's amazing that for a wine that's been aging in a barrel for 10 years, a big open, these are huge barrels.
And it's not about getting flavor from the barrel, it's about oxidation.
It's about
These
oxidation,
are
but it's been
exactly.
oxidizing for 10 years. It's still very
It's
fresh.
still young and it's still got some
still
red.
young.
Yeah, it's still got
Yeah.
some red. If you look at the 2012, it's got some red edges,
Yeah.
and then the 20, the red's almost all gone.
Yes.
Also,
Yeah,
being
yeah.
an oxidative style, a lot of people don't realize. When you go to a store and people are afraid to buy, I can't drink a whole bottle of port, it's going to go bad. Not with 20 ports. These wines
Right.
are already oxidized. It'll stay in your fridge for 6 months. It's not
Yeah.
going to budge. If you buy a bottle of 20 port, think of it as buying a bottle of scotch. You can have a little bit whenever you want. Just keep it in the fridge.
Right.
You don't
Yeah.
have to drink it.
It's been oxidizing for 10 plus years. Like, what's it going to do?
And on the other hand, rubies, you want to drink it. You have to.
Right.
Ruby's a fresh wine.
Right.
It'll last a little longer than a regular wine because it's got spirit in it, but still.
And it's got, maybe some grippy tannins in there or something that'll keep it, but.
Shall we move to the
Let's
next
move.
pair?
Yeah,
We have
let's
one
move to
more
the
pair.
20. So, and I'm just going to say something that I love tawny ports, and something I've always sort of like you kind of forget until you go back to it is that the 10-year-old still retains a lot of its color, like its reddish
Yes,
color.
exactly.
Like, people go to a restaurant and order a 10-year-old tawny and sometimes think that they're going to get something that looks really
See.
tawny. Oh, shit. Well, I'll save the 20-year-olds.
So the next pair, we're doing an 02 against the 20-year tawny. So what we're doing now is seeing what the development's like. So what does the age do to the wines? And again, we're doing the same comparison, Colheitas, which is a single-year wine,
Yep.
versus a statement of age wines, we call them, which is the 20-year in this case. And we make 10, 20, 30, 40, and now the government has approved 50, and actually we're the first ones to market with it.
Very cool. Is that in the market?
It is a
in the
market. In
US?
fact, our 50-year-old 20 just got 98 points. We're very excited about that.
That's
And there's no more left.
of course.
Because we sold it all. Of course.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at the 02. O2 is one of my favorites as well. And now you're going to see the evolution. There's been an extra 10 years in barrel here.
Yep.
I mean, barring any differences on the vintage,
Right.
it's an extra 10 years. That's really the most impactful
Right.
thing here.
You get to listen to us tasting wine.
So the tannins have regressed. So and you get more of those nutty flavors.
Yep.
Less of the fruit flavors, more of the nuts.
Yeah, the fruit is still there, and the acidity is definitely still there. It's very,
The O2s are rather,
Right,
rather
but
round
it's-
vintage as well.
but that nuttiness. I mean, we're starting to have that lingering nuttiness comparable
Exactly.
to the white ports.
And I would say I recently had the O1. The O2 is actually a bit fatter than the O1. The O1 is much leaner. So different content. So just
Yeah.
these years will change from year to year. Now we can taste the 20 year.
Okay, wait.
So again, the 20 year is a blend.
So this is a house style.
The
This
house
is
style,
not
exactly.
reflective of the.
And by the way, every house has its own style. So don't necessarily expect the 20 years from house to house. We tend to be known as a drier house.
Okay.
Our wines aren't quite as sweet.
Yep. But it seems like your house style is also going to be one of the most consistent house styles because you have the stocks. You're not buying stocks from others. So you really know.
And in a port house, of course, in any winery, there's a vineyard manager, a winemaker. In a port house, you've got a master blender, like in a Scotch house, it's a three-legged stool. Everybody works together.
Yeah. Well, these are amazing. And on this, what I found interesting, both with the Colheita, the white, and also with the tawny, is that the house style is, just as you said, a tiny bit sweeter than
Exactly,
the
yep.
vintage. And then it's rich, but it's not as nutty. It has more of a balance of the nuts and the fruit, whereas the vintage, it could express, whatever it wants, to be honest. But both of them seem to be a little bit nuttier.
Exactly, and that's because of the age.
nuttier.
As the older the
Like
20s
me.
get, the older the 20s get, the more nuts you get, the less fruit you get. And it's generally, it's most often referred to as walnuts, but just nuts in general.
Yeah.
You're going to get really picky about it.
All nuts are good nuts in my book. So what's something I find interesting is as you get to this 20-year-old mark, the colors.
So that's the 20-year-old white, or is that the...
This is the 20-year-old white.
And the 20-year-old tawny.
And the 20-year-old tawny. And the colors, they're not the same. Obviously, the tawny's still,
Much darker
much
at this
darker.
point.
Yeah.
Wait until they're 70 years old.
Yeah.
And when they get to be 70 years old, that white is going to be darker, and that's going to be light. Just what happens to the
It's
wine.
just,
Kind of funny.
the wine, the color falls out of this and the color kind of gains on this one. And that's really interesting. But it's, I think a lot of people think of port as sort of heavy, like heavy and sweet. And that's
Alcohol
not,
content. The Colheitas in general tend to be, again, less sweet and higher acidity and more lively on the mouth. And that's really the advantage of Colheitas because it's the vineyard. That's where the vineyards come in. For the Statement of Age program, about half the wine is sourced from our own vineyards and half is long-term contracts. But for the Colheitas, everything comes from our vineyards and everything comes from the best lots at the top of the hill.
And
so it's cooler up there.
It's cooler up there. There's more acidity.
Exactly.
There's nothing getting in the way of the sun. So you have a really
So you have
great
good
balance.
ripeness and you have more acidity as well.
Yeah. Well, these are beautiful. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much for taking us through these. I
It's
hope
my
you guys.
pleasure. Thanks for having me out here.
Yeah, you're welcome. This is the new barn out in the country. Again, Serge Losac, his Wines in Motion with Kopke Winery, the oldest port wine house, with some really, really amazing Colheitas and vintage ports. Tawny and white. I think white port is something that everybody needs to have.
If you've never tried an aged white port, it will change your mind.
It will
about
change.
everything.
Yes. Your world will change. Thank you so much for joining, and until next time.
Bye-bye.